All right. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 10 of Blake&Vish Sports. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about some Bobby Saleh and how his most likely loss and his departure is going to affect the Niners. Then we're going to go into some Tua talk and what's been happening down in Miami and should they potentially move off of him. They have the third pick in the draft. They also have other good ammo if they wanted to try to trade up. And then we're going to preview the wildcard games. So there's 6 games this year due to there being some
7 teams.
Yeah, 7 seeds, and the second seed doesn't have a bye. So that is what we got on tap today. And so let's first start off with the topic that's starting to just come around now, and that's Tua. And should the Dolphins move off of him? So we could just set some context. So Tua, as a starter, has come in multiple games. He's also been subbed out of games for Fitzpatrick. In games he's been underwhelming, you could say. And as of now, the Dolphins have the number 3 overall pick via the Texans for that trade in which they committed highway robbery. And they also have 2 other first-rounders. They have their own. They have the Steelers. They have a bunch of second-round picks. And they have extra picks next year, too. So this is the best chance they have to go all in on a quarterback, whether that be Fields, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Mac Jones. I mean, Trevor Lawrence pretty much set at number 1, so that's not really much of a possibility. But, Vish, what do you think about the Dolphins potentially? Should they even think about moving off Tua, or should they certainly do it?
Well, we can't say anything with certainty because we don't know how good college prospects are going to be. I mean, 2 years ago, Tua was thought of as the best college quarterback since, like, Andrew Luck. People were so high on him. And then he picks up a couple injuries and all of that, and people aren't so high on him before the draft last year. I do think they have to look into it. And it's not that Tua is bad. I actually think Tua's been fairly solid. He's not a bad player by any means. It's not like he was losing them games by turning the ball over. He just wasn't making enough plays. That was the thing with him. Well, I think Tua's a pretty solid player. But the thing is, I don't think the Miami Dolphins are going to be picking top 5 for the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. I think Brian Flores is that good of a coach. I think they've assembled that good of a roster with their defense and with their offensive weapons, the fact that they have assets to grow it. So I think they have to make that consideration. And the reason I think that consideration has to be there is because I don't think Tua's ceiling is that high. You're looking at, for me, Tua right now is kind of small, not super athletic, and doesn't exactly have a big arm. When we're talking about the guys that are the top guys for the foreseeable future, we're talking Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson. The common Justin Herbert, the common theme between all of these guys is that they're physically very, very above average. And Tua doesn't have a great arm. It's okay. He's not super athletic, and he doesn't make a lot of big-time throws where it's like Joe Burrow, there's nothing there, escapes the pocket, makes a guy miss, and makes a really nice throw down the field. He's pretty good within a system, which is good. I think he can be a good player. Mm-hmm. But I think if the Dolphins study these quarterbacks and they realize, hey, Justin Fields, if we get him and put him in our offense and teach him how to play quarterback with his physical gifts, he could be 10 times what we think Tua is currently. Or same thing with Zach Wilson. Then I think it's a move they got to make. But I'm not going to say, oh, they should move off of Tua. I'm not going to say, oh, they shouldn't move off of Tua. I'm just saying that this is a variable that they need to consider because they're picking at number 3.
So I'm going to disagree with you on this one. If I'm the Dolphins, I kind of am with you on the Tua that he doesn't really have the makings of being like a top 5 quarterback. He doesn't have the strongest arm. He's mobile, but not like a Lamar or someone like that where he can you can just run power plays, right? So my thing with him is they have him 4 years cheap. I'm really thinking that they, in the next few years, all they got to do is get like a really good team, and he could be a good enough game manager that they can compete and go deep into the playoffs. And when you're looking at their defense, they probably don't really need to draft anyone in the early rounds. Like, their defense is really good. They have Flores, who's by all accounts, as of now, from what we've seen, he's a coach of the year, potentially coach of the year. I'd say Stefanski's probably ahead right now just because they made the playoffs.
Flores too.
Yeah. But he's still been amazing, right? He's done a good job. He's actually looking like the only Belichick disciple who's going to be a good coach. And so they have the 3rd pick in the draft, right? So obviously there's a ton of quarterbacks, but something people haven't been talking about enough is the offensive tackle Sewell. And he's one of the highest rated offensive linemen like ever. People are saying since Orlando Pace. And so we know like Orlando Pace is a Hall of Famer, right? So when he was in college, he actually got 4th. He was 4th in the Heisman race as an offensive lineman. And that's the type of prospect he's being compared to.
Number 1 overall pick.
One of the guys. That's the type of guy I want on my team. And my thing with Tua too is when you look at this offense, they don't really have much talent, right? Their offensive line is all right. It definitely could get better. Sewell would help that. Their receivers aren't all that great. Their top 2 are Devontae Parker and Gesicki. Like that's probably one of the worst like duos for teams, and their running back group isn't all that spectacular either.
Right. And their scheme is okay.
Yeah. So I'm thinking they definitely are just going to go offensive heavy in this draft. Take a lineman. They're going to draft a receiver, and this receiving class is really, really good. You know, there's Jamar Chase, Waddle, Smith, Bateman. There's tons of dudes. I'm thinking they're going with a couple of a lineman, a receiver, and then evaluate it from there. But I don't think they should. I think you got to let them develop. And that's one of the things that teams, after seeing what Herbert and Burrow did, teams are probably a little more impatient seeing what Kyler did. And, like, it's a more quarterback-friendly league, right? And so teams are like, if my quarterback doesn't look amazing off the start, just get him for a new one. And I just disagree with that entirely.
Yeah, so that's kind of the new NFL premise, right? Like 10 years ago, this conversation would be insane. And then the Cardinals drafted Josh Rosen 10, shipped him to Miami, and drafted Kyler Murray. So that president has kind of changed the outlook. And I think a lot of it is because of the changing contract structure. Yeah. Right now, the NFL is all about maximizing a Super Bowl window with a cheap quarterback, and that's a quarterback on a rookie contract. And I agree, like the Miami offense needs help. Like, and I think Tua can be very solid, and you can win with Tua if you give him weapons and you build a better scheme around him. Both of those things I totally agree with. But the thing for me is if you're doing those things and he's a Jared Goff level player, you know, one of those quarterbacks that's not a superstar, but he fits somewhere 15 to 20 in the NFL, you know, with like Goff, Jimmy G, those kind of guys. Can you win a Super Bowl with him? I'm not 100% sure if you can. And I think if Miami looks at it and they evaluate these quarterbacks and they say, Justin Fields, for sure, star, or Zach Wilson, we really think he can be a star with us, then you got to pull the trigger because the difference between having a good roster and having Mahomes or Lamar or Deshaun Watson is totally different from having a good roster and having like a Jared Goff. So that's where I'm a little all over the place with this entire kind of situation. Yeah. Because in theory, I agree with you, right? You have a young quarterback. You just invested in him. He's coming off a brutal injury and all of these things. Like, why don't you get him help and try to build around him? Where's the concept of letting quarterbacks develop? But if you can go into this draft with the top 5 pick when you're not going to be picking top 5 much longer because of your coach and your roster, and you look at one of these quarterbacks and say, dang, I think they're going to be a star, then I just feel that, man, because I just don't believe that much into a ceiling from a physical standpoint.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very limited. It's not like he's Kyler Murray where he's small, but he's ridiculously fast with an enormous arm. He's kind of B across the board or kind of average across the board, like pretty good arm, beautiful quick release, not that athletic, kind of quick, but not athletic enough to run away from pressure, kind of small. Yeah. So all those things are there. I think Tua is a good player. I think Tua can be a good player. But if they look at one of those guys physically and they see, well, he can be like Justin Herbert, because that's what they're going to be measured up against. because they passed on Herbert. And if they look at Fields and they say, dang, he's got that type of physical gifts, then I think they got to make the move that way.
No, I'm with you on that too. Like if they think that Zach Wilson or if Fields somehow falls to them, because you never know what the Jets are going to do too. They could take it, like as much as they should take a quarterback. If they for some reason believe in Darnold and that most of the stuff wasn't his fault, they could take Sewell at number 2. I mean, they could always use O-line help. And then if Fields is there at 3, like that kind of puts them in a situation where they're like, if they think Fields is like that dude that's going to be top 5 quarterback and they don't think Tua can reach even top 10 maybe, like that could definitely be an avenue they take. And what we have talked about before is like QB on a rookie deal, right? And so they still would have Tua for 4 years, or they could go with Fields for 5 years, or Zach Wilson, or whoever they think is like the next star, right?
Yeah. And the other thing is, I think that's not being talked about is Miami's not bereft of assets. They have a ton of assets.
Yeah.
So even if they spend the 3rd overall pick on a quarterback, they still have 6 picks within the top 100, which means that they can still address, okay, you don't get Sewell. Maybe the offensive line situation they can improve through free agency because they're still going to be one of the top 5 teams in terms of cap space. And they can still, this receiver class is still loaded. They can come back in the draft and with one of their 2 second round picks, take a Chris Olave or Rondale Moore, somebody like that. And all of a sudden they're still getting better weapons. And if you get the special quarterback physically, then your window is limitless for those 5 years. So, I mean, it's a lot to consider. There's still a lot that needs to happen. I don't think my thought process even on this is, what should I say? It has enough clarity where I'm just kind of throwing out a bunch of random thoughts in my head. I think you have a more understanding of where you see this situation, but I think it's something definitely to watch how it progresses through the offseason.
Yeah, and with that too, they have cap space, right? Like it's not the Jaguars cap space where they have like 100 million, but they still do have good ample cap space where they can sign people that they need to.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say my other thing is too, maybe they like, say, Trey Lance or Mac Jones, but they want to get that offensive tackle. They still have their pick and the Steelers pick, so those are like middle of the 1st round. Steelers.
They don't have the Steelers.
I thought they had 3, or was it?
No, that was last year. That was last year. So they have 1-1, 2 2s, and 3 3s.
Okay, but even still, if they use their pick and some of their like mid round and later picks, they can move up to like top 10.
Right.
Not sacrificing too much, and they could still probably get one of the like the 3 to 4, 5, 6 quarterback that like. So the top 2 is firmly set as Lawrence and Fields. I think we can all agree on that, right?
Yeah.
I think after that, it's kind of more personal preference. There's Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Trey Lance. Is it just those guys, or am I forgetting?
Yeah, I think the top 3 is set between Lawrence, Wilson, and Fields. I think those are the top 3. And then I think Jones, Lance, Trask, Desmond Ridder, a lot of guys fall.
Yeah.
In the next.
If they thought one of those dudes, like if like Trey Lance, for example, is like a pretty polarizing quarterback, right? He has all the physical tools. You don't know if like all his technical skills are the best, and you don't know his competition level was the best.
Experience.
Yeah, exactly. So if they think he could be someone, they could move up and take him like with the 10th pick or something, and that's really not like handicapping him too much for assets that they have. It's definitely something. I mean, I'm still of the mindset that they shouldn't do it, but it's not something that they should just completely close the book on.
Right, and that's my ultimate take, I think. I think that it's not something that's pressing because I think Tua showed even in his small time starting, though there weren't any big time plays, like he's solid, he can manage the game for sure. At the very least, he can be a top 20 type quarterback. And I think that they got to at least evaluate it. They got to open that avenue and make sure that they do their due diligence just to ensure that they're making the right decision at quarterback. And I thought actually what you brought up is interesting with the guys. Let's say they think a guy at 4 is their guy. They think he's the best guy in this draft. They think he's special. They think Lance is the guy they look at. They could even trade down, get a couple more picks, get a pick for Tua, and then they're still in control of this draft board. So they have a lot of leverage on a lot of different ways they want to go. And then the other thing you brought up with free agency before we close this topic is that There are a lot of really good free agent wide receivers. There's a lot of really good wide receivers in this draft. You're going to have a Juju Smith-Schuster be a free agent. You're going to have an Allen Robinson be a free agent, a Kenny Golladay, an A.J. Green, a Marvin Jones, all pretty good players that would, besides Devontae Parker, maybe even all five of those guys are better than Devontae Parker. So if you can get Devontae Parker, Allen Robinson, and a draft pick, your receiving room is so much better because Gesicki's a good receiving tight end.
It's like certainly a top 10 receiving room. And you have Gesicki at tight end who, although he's not the best blocker, he's still pretty good receiving. And you could always find a blocking tight end somewhere. I'm big on, for team structure, I'm pretty big on like building up the line. I think that's proven over the years to be the most effective way to like make it deep is just have a strong offense and defensive line. But and also another thing too is they could also just retain Fitzpatrick, and if Tua gets injured or he's like playing bad, he's shown glimpses of just
magic,
absolute greatness. That throw against the Raiders was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. That should get talked about more. I know I was getting hyped up a lot, but like seriously, the man was he literally had his face mask getting yanked. I don't know how he didn't get whiplash. But yeah, impressive.
Jamal brought up Will Fuller. He would be another great fit. So there's a lot of avenues. The bottom line is whether they stick with Tua, whether they go in a different direction. If you're a Miami Dolphins fan, you should be on cloud nine because your team has an opportunity to be dominant. With Brian Flores, all those assets, all those picks, all that money, and that defense, they're going to be really special. 4
years of a cheap quarterback at least, right?
Yeah, right. They're going to be fantastic.
And so moving off of that, we did want to cover this. So the Niners situation with Robert Saleh, aka Bobby Saleh, they're probably going to lose him. I think that's like a foregone conclusion as of now. At the beginning of the season, last offseason, he was already getting interviewed a little bit. And this season, I think he really showed how good of a defensive coordinator and leader he is. The injuries and whatnot. Where do you think he'll go is my first question for you.
Yeah, so I think Detroit is ultimately going to be the job that he's going to get. It's tough to say. It's just that Jay Glazer reported that Atlanta, where he's interviewing, is looking for an offensive head coach. So that kind of rules him out. I almost feel like the Chargers, Brian Daboll, because him and Telesco went to high school together and all of that. I think that's kind of a done deal, I want to say, but I don't know. I don't know why he would want the Houston's job other than for Deshaun Watson, which is a pretty valid reason to want any job, but it'll be tough for him to be a defensive coordinator and go coach a defense that has like 2 good players on it. It'll really make him look bad. So I think Detroit is ultimately the place he's going to end up going. He has Michigan roots, all of that. And the other thing is, how his loss is going to affect the Niners, because I think both of us kind of agree that he's going to go and get a head coaching job and he deserves to get a head coaching job. I don't think it's going to be obviously losing a coach like Robert Saleh, who's excellent at what he does, is going to always affect the Niners. He's a great leader of men. He's better, I think, in X's and O's than I ever gave him credit for the first couple years, especially this year, changing their defense to a totally split safety defense where they play quarters, 2-man, and a lot of trap coverages, I think, has been big. And then he has a lot of little creative fire zone blitzes and stuff. So he's pretty good with his X's and O's. He's a great communicator, leader of men. I know as a Packers fan, you get upset watching him jump around after Nick Bosa gets a sack or DeForest Buckner was splitting double teams and getting sacks that way. But the way the players respond to him, it's real. They play hard for him, and he's awesome that way. I think the biggest thing with Robert Saleh is that I think that if they get a Raheem Morris, I don't think that they're going to feel the loss of him that much. I think Kyle Shanahan is that good of a coach. I think he's created that good of a culture. And I think he has such a good idea of what he wants in his defense and how he wants his defense to play and how he wants the entire thing to look. I think he can adjust to the loss of coordinators, even though Robert Saleh is fantastic. I really compare Kyle Shanahan to Bill Belichick, a young Belichick. I think Kyle Shanahan is that talented. Maybe I'm being a little too much of a homer. Maybe I'm putting too much pressure on him. But Belichick has overcome the loss of coordinators for years just because he's that good. And I think Kyle knows the entire picture the same way as Belichick, where he knows defense, he knows offense, he knows special teams, he knows what he wants his team to be. And ultimately, as good as Robert Saleh is, I think he will be successful as a head coach for who I think he'll go, which is the Detroit Lions. I think it won't be too big of a loss because I think Kyle knows enough people to hire and their defense will be fine with the talent it has.
So my thing is last year, I think it was really tough to evaluate how good he was. I mean, you look at that team and how loaded the defense was, and it was kind of tough to say whether it's just this D line being able to rush four and get pressure constantly. Like, how much is Saleh actually doing? When you compare that to this year and the talent level that was on that defense, besides like Fred Warner, I wouldn't really say they had any star players on the team.
But Fred Warner, Jimmy Ward, that's it.
Yeah, but comparing that to the prior year, there was like 4 or 5 dudes that were playing at a Pro Bowl or even higher level. And so having their defense remain still competitive in games, I thought that was honestly incredibly impressive. And I'm thinking he'll go either Lions. I think Lions is probably the main one. Falcons could be another like team maybe he would go to, depending on how they want to, like where they want to go in the future, because we know Matt Ryan's older. Maybe they want to become a more defensive-minded team. Tough to say. But my only problem with that is the last time they got a guy from the Seahawks tree or the Pete Carroll tree, it was Dan Quinn. And the defense was never all that great, right? So that would be my only thing, is they might be a little bit weary of that. But yeah, Lions seems like a good thing. He does have the Michigan roots, which is pretty huge. And I feel like that's been the main thing in the media as of right now, right? It's been Saleh to the Lions. But yeah, I would say that. And yeah, how do you think, were you expecting him to do, or the defense to be as good this year as they were?
No, I really wasn't. I was surprised, and I kept telling people when I used to talk to them, I'd be like, the defense can't be this good. You know, losing a player like Tart, losing a player like Bosa, losing a player like D Ford, and all of those guys. I'm like, all right. And you compound that with the fact that they already lost to Forrest Buckner. I'm like, all right, defense is going to slow down. And they really played well throughout the season. They had a couple bad games, but I mean, who's stopping the Buffalo offense? Can you really blame them? I don't think you can. And they were really sound. He's a really good coach. And but I think ultimately when you bring up Atlanta, I do have this question for you. Why would Atlanta hire Robert Saleh over just sticking with Raheem Morris? Raheem Morris is also a 43-year-old defensive coordinator who's been a head coach. He comes from the Monty Kiffin tree of very, very, very prominent coaches from an excellent Bucs defensive staff that had Mike Tomlin, Raheem Morris, Joe Barry, Gus Bradley, Rod Marinelli, all these guys who've had so much success elsewhere. And he was the coach of the Bucs, and they had one 10-6 year with Josh Freeman. So if you're Atlanta, why would you take Saleh over him?
I'm with you. But the fact that they haven't like explicitly stated that they want to keep him is like my main thing. Like he's done a lot better than Quinn, obviously. And their defense has turned around in a drastic way. I mean, even considering the lack of talent, right? But they haven't stated. They've been interviewing people. They've not officially like confirmed it's him. And I feel like if they were 100% certain on keeping him, they would have said that already. So that's my only thing with why like they're a team that might get a new coach. But I think they should stick with Morris. I mean, he did pretty solid for them already, and he has some pretty good experience. So why they haven't confirmed it, that's beyond me. But it's always a possibility.
So selfishly, this is what I'm hoping happens. I'm hoping they hire an Arthur Smith or some offensive head coach.
Yeah.
The Lions hire Saleh, and then Raheem Morris comes to the 49ers because he's very tied to Kyle Shanahan, and he becomes the defensive coordinator.
And another thing, too, with like what you were saying is there's always those head coaches that are like defensive-minded that flare out as head coaches, but they always go back to being a DC because when they were a DC, they did a good job. And that's
right.
What
Mike Patton.
Yeah, I think the Niners would be a team that like signs one of those head coach like failures, but they were good as a DC because we know what Shanahan can do with the offense, right? Like that's always going to be, if healthy, a top 5 to top 7 unit. But he needs someone to run the defense, and if he got a former head coach, I really think that would be huge for them, and someone who is typically they're always successful as a DC.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Salah's going to be a big loss. I think we're both assuming the Niners are
Mhm.
going to lose him, but I think that the Niners can overcome it, and they can overcome it because Kyle Shanahan is that guy as a head coach. Real quick, we see a couple questions in the comments before we go to our next topic. We'll just address them. We'll do this topic for sure.
Mhm.
One of these days, maybe after the Super Bowl in the offseason. This is definitely something that's on our laundry list of things we need to do, and we'll definitely cover it. And then Jamal, stay tuned. We'll cover both what Zach Wilson mentioned and the rumors of Deshaun Watson allegedly wanting out of Houston, and the fact that Niners fans are willing to attach themselves to any quarterback that allegedly wants out or there's a possibility of getting. We'll cover all of that later in the show after we preview the games. So now let's get into it. We got an exciting weekend of wildcard football. I'm really excited to see what happens. I mean, the first game that we got to talk about is the Baltimore Ravens versus the Tennessee Titans. So this game, Blake and I have both been very vocal on defending Lamar Jackson. We both think he's a top 10 or maybe like top 7 quarterback. We
Mhm.
both think he's excellent, and we both think that the narrative on him choking in the playoffs and all of that is absolutely garbage. And so I think this is a game that he's going to get an opportunity to rectify it. There's a lot of underlying storylines, the fact that they lost to Tennessee last year, the fact that they already lost to Tennessee in the regular season this year. But Baltimore is super hot. Lamar is playing MVP level football. So, Blake, what do you think is going to happen? How do you think this game is going to go down? What do you see with this?
Yeah, so for me, I'm thinking that the Ravens with Lamar Jackson are going to get their first. He'll get his first playoff win basically, and it's mainly due to their offense has been clicking as of recently. I know they haven't played the best defenses, but the Titans' defense is actually terrible. They have the worst defense in the playoffs right now. And me and you were really high on this team, right? We knew how good their offense was, probably a top 5 unit. That's their top 5 in scoring. And we kind of thought, no way this defense can get worse. I mean, we talked about it earlier in the year. Like, they don't have any semblance of a pass rush. And it hasn't gotten better. It's probably gotten worse, their defense.
We were expecting it to get better. That was always why we were high on Tennessee.
Yeah. I'm pretty anti-Titans after just seeing their defense over the last few weeks. You talk about the Bengals game. Without Joe Burrow, the Bengals dropped over 30 points on the Titans. That just should simply not happen for a playoff caliber team.
That was on the Texans. They beat the Titans with Joe Burrow. They beat the Titans with Joe Burrow, yeah.
Okay, it was with Joe Burrow, sorry. But still, I'm just not I just can't trust this defense anymore. I've seen what they've done the last few weeks. Not for me. And I think Lamar's going to get his first win. He's been playing better. J.K. Dobbins is finally getting all the carries, which is what should happen. As much as I love Mark Ingram and Justice Hill and Gus Bus Edwards, feed the man you got in the second round. And they have been. And I think that'll be the difference is their running game will be nice. Their defense is not anything like it was last year. And I think they're going to come away with a victory. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm with you on Tennessee. I think the loss of Dean Pease has really hurt their defense. I think his creativity was able to cover up for the fact that they had similar personnel last year. I think they tried to address their pass rush with the late signing of Jadeveon Clowney, and him getting injured really did not solve that problem. I mean, I think Jeffrey Simmons, we've done a video on him before. I think he's slowed down a bit, but I still think he's a really excellent player inside. I think their linebackers are okay, and Jayon Brown and Rashawn Evans. And I don't mind their secondary players on paper. Like Adoree Jackson is fine. Desmond King is pretty good. And the safety tandem Byard is pretty to very good. And Vaccaro's okay. But they just cannot seem to stop a nosebleed.
No.
They're struggling on defense. They're really struggling. And it really stinks because I think their offense is even better than last year. They have 2 legit receivers. It's kind of like Minnesota's offense last year. They got Ryan Tannehill, who's a top 10 type quarterback. Excellent player, especially within this offense. They have a really strong running game built around 2 or 3 runs with Derrick Henry, who's really special. I mean, 2,000 rushing yards. Are there any more superlatives that can be used to describe him? And finally, you have this excellent pass game built off of play action with A.J. Brown, who's awesome, and Corey Davis, who's one of the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL. So in theory, Tennessee is so good, but I'm going to take Baltimore. And the reason I'm going to take Baltimore is because of Lamar Jackson. I don't think this Titans defense has any chance of stopping Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's playing phenomenal. The run game for the Baltimore Ravens is back to being what it was in his MVP season. And you talked about J.K. Dobbins. I feel like their scheme is Greg Roman is cooking it up in the run game again. And we've talked so much about how the Baltimore Ravens wide receivers aren't that good. And that's why it's hard for Lamar Jackson to throw the ball. And it is a valid reason, but it feels like Lamar is making it work in spite of that. Hollywood Brown is still dropping touchdowns for them, but Lamar Jackson is dropping dimes when it counts. He does a really good job within the pocket, and he knows when to run and create plays off schedule. So for those reasons, I'm going to take the Baltimore Ravens. I do think their defense is a bad matchup for the Tennessee Titans offense. I don't think they have enough size inside. But I think they'll play man coverage on those two receivers with Humphrey, who I think is a top 3 corner, and Marcus Peters, who's really good. And they're just going to load the box similar to what the Packers did and sell out to stop Henry. And as long as they're willing to tackle and willing to hit, I think that Baltimore's got a really good shot. And hopefully we can finally put to rest the Lamar can't win a big game narrative.
And along with that, so we kind of saw what happened with the Packers and what they did. And what their scheme basically was is in the first half, they would just put 5 or 6 D linemen, and they'd have 2 linebackers and only 4 dudes in the secondary. And they basically were daring them to pass. Now, this Titans roster, their O-line is really good at run blocking, but in the pass blocking, like just simply like just dropping back, no play action, it's really not all that great. And I think we saw what happened in that game when they would try to do the drop back passing because they couldn't really run that efficiently. Now, I say that efficiently. They still averaged 4 yards a carry. Henry still had 98 yards, which is good by all accounts, right?
Yeah.
But they really weren't able to, build a strong play action off of their running. And
they weren't able to dictate terms with their run game, which was the big deal.
And it hurt that they, got down to somewhat of an early loss, right? So they were feeling more forced to pass, but their line really wasn't holding up much. And so the Packers have a really good secondary, we haven't been able to say that in probably 10 years, but their secondary is good, and the Ravens secondary is also really good. So if they're able to, have only 4 or 5 D-backs, I really think they can slow down this offense. And I know we've seen Henry kill them time and time again. I hope it'll be different this time. I want to see Lamar get a win. I want to see him deeper into the playoffs, and I'm kind of sick and tired of watching this Titans defense. So I'm really hoping the Ravens win.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably cheering for Tennessee. I don't know, for whatever reason, I'm kind of attached to the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah.
But I think Baltimore is going to win. And I think the big thing is what you brought up with the Packers, right? The Packers game plan is, I think, right on. The Packers are very similar in terms of their personnel to the Baltimore Ravens, except they're actually worse in their front seven. They don't have a Calais Campbell and a Brandon Williams who are really big and on their day can dominate up front. They just have one Kenny Clark, and then Zadarius Smith, Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary's pretty good against the run. And then Zadarius Smith is their pass rusher. I mean, the Ravens also have Yannick Ngakoue and Matt Judon. So theoretically, their front seven should be better. And then their secondary is similar to the Packers in the sense that Chuck Clark is a very solid player, just like Adrian Amos is a very solid, good player. And then Deshaun Elliott can be good in certain situations, just like in certain situations, Darnell Savage in certain roles within their defense does a phenomenal job. And then you add to the fact that they both have 2 corners. The Baltimore Ravens have a lockdown corner, just like the Packers do with Jair Alexander and Marlon Humphrey. So the game plan should be similar, and I expect it to yield similar results, though I think Ryan Tannehill will play a much better game than what he did against the Packers.
Yeah, that we can say that too, is this game was played in the snow, and you could tell Tannehill just seemed kind of uncomfortable.
Throwing the ball in the snow.
Yeah. It'll be exciting to see, though. It is played in Tennessee this time, so they're not going to have snow. At least I don't believe so. But if they can follow the same script, their defense should be able to hold up enough for like Lamar and co to figure it out. And
right,
you know how we mentioned that the Titans have a pretty good secondary, right?
yeah.
Well, your good secondary is not going to be able to, pass defend for 8 seconds. And that's pretty much what it's been like for their secondary, as they can really not create any sort of pass rush. And if we remember last year too, Jarrell Casey, I mean, that loss was just massive for them.
Right.
So he's on the Broncos now. They traded like a 6th rounder to get him. Pretty good trade for them. But, yeah, their pass rush is it's hard to watch, man.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that all Baltimore's defense needs to do is get 2 or 3 stops, because I don't have confidence in the Titans' defense being able to get stop after stop against Lamar. And ultimately, that's why I think both of us like Baltimore in this game. So, moving on. We got a big NFC West divisional matchup in these playoffs. We got the Rams versus the Seahawks. Rams, defense, run the ball. So we think that I think this is going to be a good matchup. Whether Wolford plays, whether Goff plays, I think the Rams are still going to have a really good chance. And then Seattle, their offense, like, what's going on the last 3 weeks? Russell Wilson doesn't seem to be willing to take chances. He's not seeing things as good as he was seeing it before. But their defense is playing better. Granted, they played worse offenses, but their defense is playing really well. There's a lot to break down with this. Who do you think is going to win? What do you think is going to happen?
So I'm all aboard the Seahawks this game for the simple reason that I just don't trust the quarterback situation on the Rams. So we know that Goff had, I believe it was a dislocated finger, right? Or was it broken?
Broken thumb.
Something like that. And there's rumors he might come back. McVay has not revealed who's going to play. Even if he does play, and he's a lot better than that Wolford guy, I think we all saw some of the throws. His first throw, actually, against the Cardinals, he literally threw it right to the middle linebacker, Hicks. Pretty bad throw. He did better, didn't lose them the game, I guess, as much as the
he can run
backup for the Cardinals did. But, yeah, my main thing with is I just don't trust Goff to be like that Iron Man where he's going to just gut it out and, give all his heart and soul. Like when you think of like Favre or Rodgers or Brady, when they play with injuries, they just don't really look like they lose too much of a beat, right? I just don't think Goff is that type of a quarterback that can do that. Secondly, when they last played, I believe it was in Seattle, and the Seahawks just dominated them physically, like offensively and defensively. Their defense looked like a top 10 unit. It's been a lot better. That Dunlap acquisition, Blitz boys putting in some work on the pass rush, and they're really gelling together more. And speaking of, so we do have a betting video where we talk about this game a little bit, but having an elite quarterback and coach, Wilson and Carroll, I just trust that in the playoffs a lot more than an elite coach in McVay and Jared Goff, who, say what you want about him, but he's proven to be like a pretty average 16 to 20 quarterback, right?
Yeah, he is. And so I actually think Wolford's legs is something. He's pretty fast, actually. That was the first thing that I took away watching the Rams-Cardinals game, but it's not much because it's not like he's just coming out and slinging it. So I'm also going to pick Seattle, but I'm not totally convinced. I think as long as Seattle takes care of the football, they got a chance, because the Rams defense, oh my God, Brandon Staley is fantastic. Jalen Ramsey is going to once again put a lock and key on DK Metcalf. And I just think that the Rams defense up front will stop the run game. I think it's going to be a grinded out, very physical ball game. The reason I'm going to pick Seattle is because I think Seattle totally shuts down this run game. One thing Seattle's always had, even when their defense was bad, is they've always been a good run defense. And it starts because they have a lot of big guys up front, like Jerron Reed, Poona Ford, and now you add Carlos Dunlap. Those are some big people that get up the field in the run game. They're really physical. They play a really sound 8-man front. And they have 2 linebackers who are fast, physical, smart, and they hit, in Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright. And what KJ Wright does in coverage for this team and how good KJ Wright has been the last 10 years has been totally underrated. He's not Bobby Wagner. Not many people are Bobby Wagner, but he's a very good player next to Bobby Wagner, and they've had a phenomenal 1-2 punch that way. And then they're getting very creative on third downs, blitzing Jamal Adams and stuff like that, and playing a couple more coverages rather than just playing the usual Seattle scheme cover 3. I mean, they still do that, but yeah. And, I think the credit to Jamal Adams is a little overstated. I think the amount he blitzes, I think there are other safeties in the NFL that could approximate his production. Maybe they don't get 9.5, 10 sacks like Jamal Adams, but they might get 7. And maybe they add a bit more in coverage because sometimes Jamal Adams gets lost in zone coverage. But I'm not to go on a tangent. But ultimately, I think Seattle will win this game. Russell Wilson, for all his lulls, the fact that he hasn't been playing well, he always just finds a way to make it happen when they need it to happen. Right. So I think he'll pull something out. He's the master of magic plays when you need them. And I think he'll once again do that. And I'm not 100% just convinced on McVay's ability to win this game with his run game because I don't think they're going to get a lot from their pass game. I think Seattle's going to load the box, and I don't know if McVay is going to have enough creativity there or enough personnel or enough with their line to just say we're still going to run the ball and find a way to get 140 rushing yards from 30, 35 rushes. Because if they do that, I think they have a chance. If they can get to 30, 35 runs, I think they have a chance, but I doubt it.
Yeah, and with that too, like their offense is predicated on they are able to run the ball. And if they're not able to run the ball, their offense kind of goes down the gutter. Like when they are creative and they run the ball, then they get into these play action and create mismatch.
Bootlegs.
Yeah, that's their offense. But if they're not able to run the ball efficiently and they have to go to being a drop back passing and they can't get the play action in, I don't really trust Goff. I don't trust Wolford. As good as I think McVay is, and I think he's proven it, they're kind of hindered just by that inability to run, and when it's not there, they have nowhere to go. But it's a divisional matchup, and these are always really close in the playoffs. When you're playing a team 3 times, you see them twice a year. The games are usually pretty close. I think this one, I do think it'll be pretty close. I'm going with Seattle though. I just trust Wilson. I've seen him against my team too many times. I've seen him in the playoffs too many times just create something out of nothing. And it's frustrating to watch, but it'll probably happen again.
Yeah, I'm picking Seattle for the same reason. It's going to be a grinded out, tough ball game. I think both teams are going to be under 20 points. I think it's going to be like 17-13 or maybe 19-14, 20-14. It's going to be physical. It's going to be grinding it out. It's going to be a very good game, I think, to watch. But ultimately, I think that Seattle will prevail.
Yep, I'm with you on that. And so the next game is going to be the 2 teams that are also in the same division, AFC North, Steelers and Browns. Vish, what are your initial thoughts on this one? They just played Week 17 and it was close. We know there was the COVID outbreak in the facility of the Browns. Tough for them.
Yeah, so one, I think the Browns got screwed. Kevin Stefanski not even being able to call in and call plays for this game is brutal. It's absolutely brutal. I think that the NFL, though they had a set of rules, I think they should make some adjustments because it's a playoff. It's the playoffs. You want to give every team the best opportunity to win in spite of these different circumstances that we're living in. And, I just think that the NFL should accommodate Cleveland just to ensure that you get the best possible game. But yeah, I think that I just wanted to touch on that. Ultimately, I think Pittsburgh is going to pull this out. Pittsburgh is a veteran team. They're very physical. They're very well coached by Mike Tomlin. I think they're going to be physical, disciplined, and they're going to be ready to play playoff football. I think it's a big deal that the Browns made it to the playoffs, but I'm not sure if they're ready to win a playoff game without their head coach. They're a very young team. They're a growing team. I think there's a lot to get into with the matchup because I think it is an interesting matchup. Pittsburgh stopping this. Can Pittsburgh stop the run bootleg game? Super interesting. Let's see what they do to stop that. And then on the other side, can Pittsburgh push the ball down the field or even run the ball? Because just throwing a million short passes with Big Ben is just a recipe to make Juju take a couple more Corvette hits from Von Bell. So we'll see. We'll see with their offense, but ultimately, I think again, picking against a Hall of Fame quarterback, Hall of Fame head coach in the playoffs, always hard, especially when they're at home. And just like Seattle, I'm going to pick Pittsburgh to prevail.
Yeah, and with that, so we mentioned Stefanski, but there's also just a ton of other like key starters for them that aren't able to play. Two of the most notable being Denzel Ward and Joel Bitonio. So
both are out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know. I feel bad for the Browns. Like 2020 treated them so well. The moment, the year passes, 2021, you get all the COVID outbreak. Back to being the same old Browns, it looks like. Yeah, I'm kind of sad because we saw what happened last week in Week 17. It was a 2-point game. The Steelers were playing Mason Rudolph, and Josh Dobbs was coming in a couple times for some reason. I couldn't tell you, but they had other key starters on. They kept it very competitive, and I was surprised. I think a lot of people thought that the Browns would kind of just like run the ball down their throats and just take them out pretty much because they were missing a lot of guys on both ends, but they really weren't able to. And the Steelers had some semblance of an offense. They scored 22, failed the onside, but I mean, they just played this team closely, hardly lost. They get all their starters back, and the Browns are starting to miss a bunch of starters. And this game's just not set up for Baker to succeed. And I feel if Baker doesn't have the necessary pieces in place, he can't take a team over the top like the top quarterbacks like Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Lamar can do.
Yeah, I agree with that on Baker, though I don't think this is really a fair game to evaluate him.
No, I'm with you.
Because the circumstances are just so impossible, and there's just so much stacked against them. I don't put that much stock into what happened Week 17 just because the Browns were playing with so much pressure and the Steelers were playing with house money. So for me, I kind of let that game slide. Ultimately, just hearing now, I didn't realize that Denzel Ward isn't playing. That's huge.
There's other guys too.
Right, and I think underratedly, Denzel Ward has been a top 10 corner this season. I think he's been really phenomenal, and nobody really talks about it because he's been in and out of the lineup. But when he's played, he's been fantastic. And then Joel Bitonio is one of the better guards in the NFL. And if you were going to give the Browns any advantage, you would say, well, I'd hope that their offensive line can just dominate this game. And maybe Stefanski's got a couple creative runs on how they want to run against Pittsburgh, and Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt run all over them. But losing Joel Bitonio is a pretty big loss.
Yeah.
Browns have had a great season, but I think it comes to an end. Unfortunate that there were circumstances here out of their control,
and I also feel they kind of peaked a little too early almost. Everyone was talking about like maybe they could win the AFC North. They were on a hot streak, right? And then all of a sudden they lost to the New York Jets. What? And then, they had that thriller against the Ravens. That was awesome. They looked amazing. Then they just played a close game with the Steelers, right? So they kind of peaked a little early in the year as opposed to some teams like the Bills, the Packers, the Ravens. Those teams are all like catching fire, catching steam as of now. I think the Bills are kind of more on a downslope than on an upslope, if anything. So I'm more sad that the matchup between a fully healthy and fully being able to coach Browns versus like fully healthy and coach Steelers is taken away from us, but it is what it is.
Yeah. All right. So finally, and I think this is actually the most interesting game of the entire weekend, and it's because you have the Washington football team, who's one of the worst football teams to ever make the playoffs, going against Tom Brady, who's seemingly just slinging it. I mean, he looked as good as I've ever seen Tom Brady look the last 4 or 5 games. And the Bucs look like a well-tuned, well-oiled machine, and you got them looking great. But then you take into account that the variables that, when the 7-9 Seahawks made it, they had the Beastquake game and they beat the Saints in Seattle. And then the Carolina Panthers with Ron Rivera, they won a playoff game when they made it at 6-8-1. I think that's or
7-8-1.
7-8-1 when they made it. So you got that. That's super cool. And then you throw in the fact that the one thing that's always affected Tom Brady is a dominant front four that you can sit behind and play coverage behind. And then you throw in the Alex Smith factor with him playing in a playoff game after what happened to his leg and Washington football team offense.
Yeah.
But there's a lot going on there. What do you think is going to happen? How do you think this game is going to go down? There's so much to watch here.
Yeah, so this year I've just been a huge fan of watching the Buccaneers. They're just such an interesting team to me. Not often do you see a player play with a franchise his whole career, and then the last year he leaves. Kind of crazy. So they've been under my microscope a little bit, and this team plays really well against the bad teams is what I've started to notice. And when they play on primetime or against a team that has a winning record, they've usually faltered. They've lost most of those games, right?
Yeah.
And this Washington football team is kind of an enigma to me. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, this team has the means of having a winning record. And then there's other times, like I watched them against the Eagles, and I'm like, geez, I don't want to see this team have to play again in the playoffs. They're very boring to watch. Their offense is as much as I love Alex Smith and his comeback, there's nothing more I hate than watching him dump it off to J.D. McKissick and Logan Thomas 15 times a game. I just don't like that. And my thing with the football team is they need to be able to run the ball, and they're not going to be able to run the ball against the Buccaneers.
No.
Even without Vita Vea, they can't. And
No.
Alex Smith has no means of pushing the ball down the field past 15 to 20 yards on most plays. I think every time he drops back, people watching just hold their breath and hope his legs just don't get messed up. I don't think he'll be able to push the ball down the field, even though this Buccaneers secondary has been pretty bad. It's really not very good. Their pass defense is pretty below average.
Yeah.
So I don't think they'll be able to pull it off. The check downs and dump offs aren't going to be able to be enough for them in my eyes.
Yeah, the speed of the linebacking core of between Devin White and Levante David, and then you throw in Antoine.
They're going to be playing actually, which is
okay. But you still have Levante David, Kevin Minter, who they have backing him up, is an experienced player who spent a lot of time with Todd Bowles. And you add that to the fact that you also have Antoine Winfield Jr. just flying around from that
secondary.
Right. So they're just going to be flying around and taking away these checkdowns. When I first looked at this game 2 days ago, I thought, man, maybe the Washington football team really has a chance. Maybe their front four is going to upset Tom Brady. I don't think they really actually have a chance. I think what the Bucs are going to do is they're not going to spread it out and put Brady in the situation where he's, running the New England offense, where the front four is rearing back and they're running it from shotgun, and he's throwing a bunch of 5-6 yard little routes to Wes Welker. I think they're going to go to more tight set formations, use motion to slow down the pass rush, and try to create some sort of a run game and play action down the field passing game, and look to have 6-7 man protections and really rip it down the field, because Brady's slinging it and they can throw it to Godwin and Evans, and AB looks like AB.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they're going to do. And then ultimately, I just think the Washington football team's offense is hopeless against this Buccaneers defense. The Buccaneers corners aren't really that great. Their secondary can be had, but the football team's offense can't really push the ball down the field.
Exactly.
Alex Smith is nowhere near as athletic as Alex Smith once was, for obvious reasons. How is he going to be running away from this pass rush? Because the Buccaneers have a mean front seven, and they're obviously going to shut down the run. They've been the number one run defense in the NFL for a while. Losing Vita Vea obviously hurt them, but they still play the run really well. I just think this is too much to ask of the football team's offense. I think that the front four would really, really, really just have to whip an offensive line that's actually pretty good, because Ali Marpet's a Pro Bowl, all-pro type guard. Tristan Wirfs has had an outstanding rookie season. So for those reasons, I really wish that the football team, just because, like you said, they're an enigma. They're interesting, and we're all cheering for Alex Smith and Ron Rivera. So for those reasons, man, I would really wish that they could pull it off. But I think it's going to be convincing for Buccaneers.
So to your point, right, we've talked about the secondary for the Buccaneers not being the best. Their pass rush is still really good. It's just the fact that they create a ton of pressure. Don't get that twisted. It's just their secondary, 2.5 seconds, you can get the ball out and someone's open every time.
Right.
And I think we all saw that Chiefs game where Mahomes, he was getting pressured like nonstop, but he was getting out of the pocket and making plays. If he was not as athletic as he was, he would have gotten sacked like 5 or 6 times. And when you put a statue back there, aka Alex Smith, he's not really mobile in the pocket anymore. That doesn't need to be stated any more than it already is. But he's simply not. And when you're bringing Sue, JPP, Nunez Roaches or something, and blitzing Levante David and all the other guys they have on that D line and front seven, I think he'll just be sitting back like a sitting duck back there and just getting killed. And he still has some injury problems himself, right? His calf, you saw him. He wasn't able to move all that well.
And they're gonna they said they were gonna do that weird 2 quarterback thing where they're gonna bring in Taylor Heineke sometimes.
Oh no.
He played decent. He played decent against the Panthers. It's just too much to ask of them.
Yeah.
And like you said, the Buccaneers front seven, they can really rush the passer, whether it's as Cam Newton calls him, Donkey Kong Sue, Ndamukong Suh, whether it's, as you said, Nunez Roaches, JPP, Shaq Barrett. Man, I really hope that there's some magic in the air and Alex Smith and Ron Rivera pull off this triumphant win and go on this run. But everything logical when I look at this football game says it's going to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and it's going to be rather convincing.
And even, Tom's arm, people say he's washed and whatnot, but he threw in Foxborough for 20 years. He can throw in the cold. I don't think that'll be an issue. I think the really biggest strength that the football team has is I'd rather have Ron Rivera than Bruce Arians. That's really the only major thing is I don't know. I think Ron Rivera is a pretty good coach.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of Bruce Arians' scheme. I just think it's not good for the modern NFL. But when they go to those short intermediate passes, the Tampa Bay offense can push the ball down the field. And, they have just their receiving core is, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and ultimately, like you brought up with Tom's arm is fine. He still can sling it. It's I think it's been underrated his entire career. He's got a cannon. He was throwing in Foxborough. He's got a big arm. He can sling it and he has great control of the ball and all of that. The biggest question is, can you protect him? Because he's 43 and he can no longer take hits and is willing to take hits like he once was. I think between how good their offensive line is and the fact that the front four is the only thing that's going to worry them, I think that they'll be fine. One guy brought up in the comments I think this is Washington football team, short passes and a good outside zone running game. On theory, this works, but I just don't think they'll be able to run the ball against Tampa Bay. I think Blake feels the same way. And that's why ultimately both of us like Tampa Bay in this game. So before we go, we had a couple of small topics, and we'll take some questions before we go. Obviously, there's been a lot of quarterback talk in Niners, Twitter, rumor kind of area. Then there was the big pro football talk bombshell that, look, Deshaun Watson might ask out. I know that it's been refuted by a couple other reporters, so I don't know. Again, I want to deal with facts, and this rumor isn't entirely filled with facts, not to discredit the reporting. I'm sure all the reporting is accurate. It's just people are hearing different things. And so there's the Deshaun Watson rumor. Does he want out? I know a lot of Niners fans think that just because Deshaun Watson wants out, that they're going to get Deshaun Watson. So before I send it to you, Blake, I'm just going to write the facts, right? Deshaun Watson, if he wants out, theoretically his contract is movable when you look at the cap numbers. Here's the problem. The Niners are not the only team in the NFL. And this is something I keep trying to tell people that I just don't think goes into their head. There's 31 other teams. And guess what? If Deshaun Watson's available, only the Kansas City Chiefs and the Green Bay Packers and the Seattle Seahawks and maybe the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. Those 5 teams probably contented with their quarterback. The rest of the teams in the NFL, if they have assets, are probably making an offer for Deshaun Watson. And the Niners, when they have only 2 picks in the top 100, and I don't think they're willing to trade a Fred Warner, George Kittle, a Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, that type, right? If you're trying to bring in Deshaun Watson, why would you trade everybody that you're trying to make it better with Deshaun Watson, right? Deshaun and Kyle, in theory, phenomenal fit. Would be amazing. Would be like Mahomes, Andy Reid. It would be that good. There would be a special offense. But they have 2 picks in the top 100 this year. They have a first and a second next year. they wouldn't be able to make the best offer for Deshaun Watson. It's probably going to be 3 first-round picks, 2 seconds. It's probably going to be a trade unlike anything we've ever seen. So ultimately, I don't think this is really plausible for the Niners. I don't really think Deshaun Watson is going anywhere. I just thought we had to address that real quick.
So my thing would be if a team that doesn't have the most assets, so this kind of excludes for me the Jags and the Dolphins because those teams have tons of assets and cap space.
Jets too.
Other teams besides them, if they were to trade for Watson, you know what their team would start looking like? The Texans of the last few years. That's what their team would start looking like. And we've seen what quarterbacks go for, right? It's usually a first at least or 2 firsts, right? Watson would probably require at least 3 firsts and then some, like maybe some mid-round picks, possibly even seconds. And that just cripples your team so much. And I know he's insane, right? He's probably a top 5 quarterback, you could argue, at minimum top 7, top 8. But it cripples your team so much. And I want to point to this one example because I think how we saw it unfold was it looks amazing on paper at first. You're like, wow, we just fleeced that team. And then a couple years go by and you're like, wow, why is our roster not getting any better? It's just been the same. It's because you don't have the assets. And that's the Chicago Bears trade for Khalil Mack. So we can remember they traded 2 firsts, a third, and then they got Khalil Mack and a second in return. In 2018, you're like, wow, this team is – I mean, they were 12-4. They did lose in the first round, but they looked the makings of a team that could go deep in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just like, oh, they're one piece away. But they weren't. And it got older. They couldn't retain the people. Their offense got worse. Their defense has been getting worse ever since. So I'm very much against the idea of trading just tons of assets for that quarterback.
Right.
However, I will say, I think the Jags, even the Colts too, the Jags, Colts, and Dolphins are teams that have the assets. They have the cap space. It would make somewhat sense for them to figure out that quarterback position. It's just what you're giving up for most teams is just usually very, very implausible, and it's crippling.
So I think those are the 3 teams that are best situated, and the Jets. But with the Jets, they don't have enough people, I would say, to even make such a move because their roster is still in the process of getting rebuilt. But those 3 teams to me are the best situated to make such a move. Ultimately, looking at the Deshaun Watson rumor, I think there's no way the Houston Texans trade him. That's I'm going to say that right now. So having this conversation, we're dealing in hypotheticals. Blake brought up the great example of the Bears, right? I mean, I actually was very high on making this exact comment when they traded for Khalil Mack at the time. So I'm very happy that he made this comment. But my thing is that, right, you're great in 2018, and then Adrian Amos walks to the Packers in 2019. Kyle Long retires, and then Akeem Hicks is hurt in 2019, and all of a sudden your roster doesn't have enough depth. Mitch Trubisky isn't actually that good. You realize that. And Matt Nagy isn't that creative or that good of an offensive coach. And yeah, Khalil Mack is playing awesome, but you gave up all this money and all these assets for a guy that, you know, is dominant. But for him to be worth $23 million, he has to dominate every single play in every single game. And that's an impossible ask of any defensive player, maybe outside of Aaron Donald. So even though Khalil Mack is great, like that's a pretty plausible comparison. Ultimately, though, I think that the big thing here is that I think both of us are on the same page. There's little chance Deshaun Watson actually gets moved. It was a rumor today. I just wanted to address it. I would love Deshaun Watson to be on the 49ers. I thought they should have drafted Deshaun Watson. I'm even more feeling strongly about that every single day that they didn't draft Deshaun Watson. It's the saddest thing. But I think that the chances of getting him, the Niners wouldn't have the best offer. There's way too many variables to look at. So, yeah.
Two of those 3 teams that we said would have the assets and cap space, they're in their division. They are literally in the Texans division. Right. Do you really think the Texans like a 4 firsts and other stuff? Do you think they would really trade that?
No, they're not trading him in the division. They wouldn't even trade him in the conference. I doubt they'll even trade him in the conference because they don't want to deal with Deshaun Watson in their conference. So, yeah, he's way too good a player. We'll never see a player of Deshaun Watson's caliber get traded in the middle of their prime when they play quarterback. I just think the NFL is way too like I like to believe there's not that many stupid people running teams and doing that. And I know people keep bringing up the Bill O'Brien and, oh, he traded DeAndre Hopkins. The premise of trading DeAndre Hopkins was sound. He was an aging player. He was going to make too much money. The biggest problem was that DeAndre Hopkins was traded for a second-round pick and a bad running back who makes way too much money. I don't think anybody would have a problem with the DeAndre Hopkins trade if they got a first plus. The way the Bills got a first, third, and a seventh, I think, for Stephon Diggs. If the Vikings got that, if the Texans got that for DeAndre Hopkins, I think we would all sit here and say, yeah, they lost DeAndre Hopkins, but maybe they would have an opportunity to replenish that asset in the draft. They screwed themselves with what they got for the trade, not with why they traded him. So the other rumor that's been going around is that Zach Wilson's a big quarterback that Niners fans are attached to. I don't know if you've seen a lot of him, but he's got some flair throwing the ball. He's really quick release, great throwing motion, can throw off all different kinds of platforms, make some pretty ridiculous throws. So he's like a modern type quarterback, like a Watson, Mahomes type. He's pretty athletic, quick feet. Niners fans love this guy. And recently he was doing some interview for some channel, and they asked him, what offenses do you feel you fit with? And he said, look, I don't know what offenses I fit with. I haven't studied that many NFL offenses, but he said that he basically said that I know what Kyle Shanahan does there, and I think that would be a good fit. And the other thing, and I think part of the reason he said this was because, just to give you some more context, is because John Beck, one of the people who's up in BYU, he's a former BYU quarterback. I think he has a relationship with Zach Wilson. He formerly played for Kyle Shanahan and Mike Shanahan in Washington. So I think that there's some stuff there that way. So ultimately, I really don't think these comments mean anything. Zach Wilson, I mean, yes, his agent could have some push. They could have some say, but it's not like, oh, he's just going to say, hey, don't draft me the first 11 teams. Don't pay me more money than what the Niners are going to pay me so that I can go to the 49ers. That's just how this process works. It's exciting to see that, young quarterback who everybody likes wants to play for your team. But I think that's all that's there with that conversation.
I also think he's pointing out something super, super obvious. Someone who has good physical talents would fit well in one of the best schemes in the NFL. Yeah. I mean,
what a novel concept.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like he's making some profound statement. I mean, it's like, would Derrick Henry be good behind the Cowboys O-line in the 90s? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't put too much stock into what they say pre-draft. Also just what owners and GMs say in general. It's usually they're just saying it because it's a business. So yeah. I'm not too keen on. I don't know. I don't put too much stock into those.
And it's awesome because it looks good on Kyle, but there's 10 teams in the NFL that run a version of Kyle Shanahan's offense. So if he fits well with the 49ers and what Kyle does, which just about every quarterback fits because Kyle usually adjusts and does a lot of creative and good things for his quarterback, then he's probably going to fit with 10 other teams, and a couple of them are picking in front of the Niners. I think it's cool. I think it's awesome. I think it makes you feel good as a fan and all of that, but I actually don't think it's really substantive, or there's not a lot of substance to put into what's going on with that statement. It's more or less just, hey, Zach Wilson said that. That's pretty cool. But ultimately, I don't think it has any bearing to how much the Niners like him, whether they could draft him, or all those things.
Yeah. And so I was just going to say, guys, send in questions. We do have one now, which we can talk about, but do send in whether it's Niners, general NFL talk, anything. We'd be happy to
basketball.
Answer. Yeah. So Vish, what are your opinions? I know we've talked about it. We haven't really scouted the quarterbacks too much. Probably going to wait till the offseason to look further into them. But what do you think about the Bears quarterback situation?
I say give Trubisky another chance. You finally put him in an offense that he can succeed in. You stop the shotgun RPO, trying to use him like he's Patrick Mahomes, and you got him under center, and you're playing with bootlegs and a strong run game, the way Jared Goff has succeeded under Sean McVay, the way Baker Mayfield is succeeding under Kevin Stefanski. You drafted him 3rd overall. You passed on 2 of the best quarterbacks of this generation if there's any semblance of anything, you got to give him another chance. I say run it back with Trubisky. He's played fine enough. That system is good enough. They have a lot of other holes to address. I think they should stick with Foles and Trubisky. And I think Trey Lance is a bit of a project. 13 career starts in college. I don't really care much about the competition. If he's big enough, if he's fast enough, that's going to translate. He is big enough. He is fast enough. He does have a strong enough arm. But ultimately, I just think stick with Trubisky. Don't invest another asset into a quarterback because Trey Lance is going to come into a pretty rough situation in terms of pretty poor line play, reasonable scheme, but nothing fantastic. And with no Allen Robinson or with him being a doubt on whether he's coming back, a questionable receiving room. So, yeah, that's where I'm at with the Bears QB situation.
So where I'm at with this is, so they already have Foles. I think he'll remain the backup. I think he's a better overall quarterback than Trubisky. I just don't think he necessarily fits on this Bears team. He's kind of immobile. He's the statue back there. He can't move. And the Bears' line is really not all that good. Probably a bottom 10 unit, bottom 5 in some accounts. So I think they're going to roll with Trubisky here. I'd say give it one more year. I don't think he's the guy. I don't think he's the future at all. But you got to give him another chance. And if you can actually build around him better, like get some offensive talent, and I agree with you about not using him in the shotgun. I think he's better if you just do what you do with Baker. And I think that's honestly the comparison here. You have to protect him at all costs. He's really not going to be that guy that can go out and push the ball down the field. And I think that's been proven over time. If you watch the Packers game, he was basically just throwing checkdowns the whole time. And the moment he started going down the field, he had that bomb to Mooney, and then he had the pass to Adrian Amos. He can't really push the ball intermediate, and that's a problem. And they're going to have to basically just protect him so that way when he is throwing, he doesn't have to – he makes simple reads basically.
Yeah, and they've been doing that. A lot of bootlegs, a lot of play action. It's been helpful for him, and that's where I'm at with this. So the question is, if a better option doesn't fall, then Jimmy doesn't fall into Kyle's lap, he's our QB next year. Sorry, it is what it is. Yeah, probably. I'm totally with you on that. I don't think there's much else to be said there.
I think they could draft someone in the middle.
Right, but I think Jimmy would be the starter, and then they would try to use the draft pick and reevaluate the situation the year after.
I think their best move would be maybe get a veteran guy. At the minimum, he needs some healthy competition or someone to come in, because one thing that I guess I haven't really factored in much is like he's always injured. And his really only year of healthiness was the year they made it to the Super Bowl. But besides that, he's always been injured. You at least need a backup that's better than the Beathards and Mullins of the world, although they've been somewhat serviceable at times. But having some healthy competition for him is probably a necessity at this point.
Yeah, I'm of a mindset where there's a part of me where sometimes I wake up and I say, look at Andy Dalton. He's not a bad player. If Jimmy's like the 20th best quarterback in the NFL around there, Andy Dalton is maybe at 28, 29, which isn't that bad. We're talking about an 8 quarterback difference where you could probably get Dalton for $17, $18 million cheaper. And he's had seasons where he's played like 2019 Jimmy, and he could be serviceable enough in this offense. Be a tough sell to fans, but I think he might be a stopgap route that they could go to. There's a lot of different ways to look at the quarterback situation. I'm sure we're going to beat every situation to death over the next 2 months. So we can do that. Let's see how it plays out. So your boy, sports statistician, Nick Nasto, speaking of which, he's in a betting video with Blake. They do a really good job and post it on their channel every week. Do check it out. They break down the ins and outs of all the matchups and what you should bet on and what you shouldn't bet on. It's really good. They post it every week. Check it out on our channel. And he's asked, and as always, guys, I want to mention it right now. Thank you for watching. Please do like, subscribe, just the random stuff all YouTubers say. We really appreciate your support, and we'll be pushing out content as much as we can. So who's the sleeper team in the AFC?
So I'm saying this can't be either the Chiefs or the Bills. They're not sleepers at this point. They're the top two teams. I'd say the team that has the means of winning more than one playoff game out of the seeds 3 to 7. I don't think it's the Steelers. I don't think it's the Titans. I think it's honestly the Ravens. So I know we talked about it earlier and how we didn't think they might not even make the playoffs unless they, like almost won out. And you know what? They actually did do that. They've won, I think, 4 or 5 in a row. Lamar's playing his best ball of the season, and they kind of figured out the running back situation. Like we previously mentioned that, like J.K. Dobbins is getting fed as he should be. No, it's not a slight to the Mark Ingrams and the Gus Edwards of the world, but you drafted him in the second round for a reason, and that's pretty high for a running back, and he's a beast. Give him the ball. I still think there are concerns about the receivers. We've mentioned it before. But I think this defense is kind of picking up at the right time. They've had their injuries in the past, but Campbell getting healthy is huge. Ngakoue being there.
Brandon Williams.
Yeah, Brandon Williams being back. The only doubt I have is their middle linebacker position. I know they drafted Patrick Queen, and he has some stats, but I don't think he's there yet. I think he could get there. But that'd be my team that I think could win more than 1 or 2 games. I'm not talking about the Bills or Chiefs because I think everyone expects them to go far.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's Baltimore. They have the special quarterback, right? So that always you think they could win road playoff games because of that. And I again with Tennessee, it's that defense. That if that defense was as good as it was last year, that I'd pick them as the sleeper team. Actually, I think most people would pick them as a favorite, frankly, because their offense is that good. Derrick Henry's that good, but their defense is really, really rough. We all thought it would get better. It hasn't gotten better. I'm with you. It's the Baltimore Ravens. So I just wanted to address this real quick. If he hits that pass to Sanders, it still doesn't change the fact that he has a set of flaws that have been existing, and they were existing in 2019 too. I think play calling, circumstance, and all of that overcame it. He was a good third down player. He's still a solid quarterback, but I think that whether you give him a pass, I think that when a guy wins a Super Bowl, he ultimately does get a pass. Joe Flacco got like 8 passes after he won his Super Bowl in 2012, and he was fantastic during that Super Bowl run. Jimmy is what he is. He's pretty good. He's solid. He's top 20, 21, 22, top 15, 18, 19 type quarterback. He's somewhere in that range. That's a good player. You can win with that player, but when that player is paid $27 million, you're always hoping to upgrade it. Unfortunately, the Rams can't upgrade. The 49ers can, and that's why I think they explore it every single season.
I think if they do win the Super Bowl, I honestly think all the talk about getting rid of Jimmy would be mute. I think he'd get praised so much. He'd be a media darling. People would start pressing, is he a top 10 quarterback? I think that honestly would be in the question if they did win. But the fact that they're like one play away from his whole narrative being switched to like, this guy's a bum, like we have to get rid of him, and him being a top 10 quarterback, that's where I see the disconnect in the Niners, just like media and fans and stuff.
Yeah.
I do understand it though, especially with his availability issues, and like he may be slightly overpaid, but that's just the going rate for quarterbacks as of now. So it's just such a tough question for everyone, I think.
But the thing with that for me is that I think that paints a bigger picture and really emphasizes and highlights a flaw with the entire media and the process of evaluating quarterbacks. Like so much of it, well, the guy wins, so he's automatically good. Matthew Stafford has been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL for years. He's stuck with a pathetic organization with a supporting cast that's bereft of talent, and they don't win, and everybody blames Matthew Stafford. But what is he supposed to do? Jimmy was able to play with a great coach who's really made things easy for him. I think that that's the biggest problem that points out, is that there's a real problem with how quarterbacks are evaluated and how we decide which ones are good. And I think it's rather unfortunate. Jimmy's solid, but I don't think the narrative should have been, is he top 10 to is he terrible? It should be always have been, he's a solid player who they can win with, and he does some things pretty well. So my man Abdul, who's just killing it in the comment section right now with these questions. Do you think the Bears re-sign A-Rob? Do you think they franchise him? $19 million is hefty. Blake, what do you think they do with Allen Robinson?
I think they need to re-sign him, and the main reason is we know they have the talent on defense, right? Like they have a pretty good defense. It's been not as good as it was in 2018, mainly just due to injury concerns with Hicks, and Roquan Smith's been injured a little bit and all that. But if you take Allen Robinson out of this offense and you look at just the talent on the offense, your best offensive player being David Montgomery, although he's been really improved over the last just this season, he's been really solid. That is just not an offense that's going to be highly remarked by nearly anyone. Darnell Mooney's been pretty solid. Anthony Miller has his moments. Cole Kmet and Jimmy Graham are all right, I guess, but like you're just missing something there when you don't have him. And I think they'd be starved for offensive talent if they got rid of him. And my real thing is like, why wouldn't you sign him? Like what would you do with that money that could be better allocated is my question. Franchise tag and trade's an interesting thought. I mean, we've seen it with players around the league, but I would say keep him.
I don't think there's going to be a market to tag and trade him. Okay, there's a lot of really good wide receivers in this market that are going to be cheaper than Allen Robinson. So that's one. Number two, this draft is once again stacked with wide receivers. There's like 7 guys that people are talking about going in the first round. The Heisman winner, Devontae Smith, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Rashad Bateman, Kadarius Toney, Rondale Moore, Chris Olave, and I'm missing like 3 names too. So there's a ton of people that are going to be available to draft. I think the Bears should re-sign Allen Robinson, as Blake said. And ultimately, I think it's going to come down to price. They can get him in a $10 to $12 million range. I think that's what he's worth. And I think they'd be fine paying him. I do think if you had to pay him like $20 million, 15, 18, 19, like the franchise tag, it's way too much. And then they could maybe go the draft route and get a compensatory 3rd round pick for him walking. But ultimately, I think he stays with the Bears because that's the best fit for him and it's the best fit for them.
So I think if we think about it this way, like he's not getting paid 10 or 12 million. I think he'll get paid. If he does get paid, it will be in that like 18 million range. Because that's just how it works for receivers, right? When you're a top 10 receiver, you're getting paid like a top 5 or top 3 receiver. And that's usually how it goes. I would argue he's not a receiver.
You think he's top 10?
I'd say he's near the end of that list, yeah. I mean, if you look at the quarterbacks he's played with, he's literally played with some bums. He has played with people.
He's played with bad quarterbacks, but just because you play with a better quarterback doesn't automatically make you a worse player. Like Tyreek Hill plays with Mahomes, but he's mega impactful.
I totally agree with that, but I mean, watching him over the years just put up like these great stats, and he's not getting like the best passes, right? It's not like do you think he would put up a much better stats with Aaron Rodgers? Like if he had a quarterback that could throw a back shoulder, how much better do you think he would be?
But it's not like he just magically is creating acres of separation and he's
ridiculous.
Yeah, but it's not like he also is taking a 3-yard screen and going 50 yards. I mean, I don't know. If I start naming names, like if we get into Can't Guard Mike and Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill and Keenan Allen and Stephon Diggs and Julio Jones.
There's a lot of great receivers.
Yeah, but we can continue. A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf.
I mean, how much better?
More.
I mean, it's hard to say like how much better like someone like A.J. Brown is than Allen Robinson, even if he is better. I'd say they're pretty similar, honestly.
I mean, that's rich. I mean, it's definitely worth a conversation. Maybe we got to do a video on this because I don't think he's top 10. I think
I'd say he's near the bottom of top 10.
I think he's always the convenient guy thrown around. Well, look, he plays with bad quarterbacks, but he also gets force-fed the ball and gets targets. I would love to go through the targets and break it down that way, but I think it's advantageous for him that way. I think he's really good. I just think top 10 is rich.
I'd say he's near the end. I mean, it's pretty like there's so many good receivers. It's hard to say like who's like definitively better, right? Like you can argue for him being a top 10 receiver in my eyes.
For me, he fits probably 14 to 18. That's where I think he fits.
Possibly. It's an interesting discussion.
We'll do this conversation. Someone brought up Justin Jefferson. There you go. There's another guy I think that's better than Allen Robinson. Adam Thielen is another guy in the similar conversation. I mean, there's so many people But yeah, I think you were right with the money though. I think that's where he's going to get paid ultimately.
Yeah, like
I think
someone like Juju will probably get like 10 to 12 million, and be like a amazing third receiver, average second receiver.
I mean, ultimately, I hope they get their money and maximize their money regardless of team. Those guys deserve to get paid. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we got a couple more questions. So a few of these questions are stuff we've covered in the video, like our thoughts on Watson. Definitely go check it out. We'll repost a lot of these clips on our channel, so you can check it out there. Please like, subscribe, the usual stuff. Thank you so much for coming in and watching. We definitely did talk about Watson. I know there's a little more stuff that went down with Watson while we were going live. Maybe we'll cover it on another day. We'll see. There's a lot of variables to fall. But what are your opinions on the Eagles game? I think we'll take this and we'll end it, but I think this is an interesting one because I do remember us talking about it, and there was a small difference of opinion between us.
Yeah. So my thing was, I'm disappointed they did it. I wanted to see if Hurts could come back. He's going to be their potentially quarterback of the future, depending on the Wentz situation. I think he probably will be, at least for next year, be like the starter, right? And they bring in Sudfeld. He's been in the league for about 4 years. You probably know what you have with him. And he has basically an arm punt, which was just a bomb interception. He fumbled the snap. It was a low snap. He didn't really jump on it. He tried to pick it up. That didn't work. And he just, by all accounts, just didn't look like he deserved to be on the field. Hurts looked way better, especially behind the bad O-line that is the Eagles. It seemed like they were tanking, but I've seen stuff that said the Eagles said they were going to start Sudfeld.
Yeah, I've also read that.
That's the thing.
That's where I was going to go.
Blown with. Like, they said they were going to put him in.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. That's where I'm going to go. They said they were going to put in. They clearly felt that their season was over, and I didn't think it was a tank. I think they looked at it as an opportunity to evaluate Sudfeld within a context of a real NFL game, because I know they've been high on him, right? They kept him with Foles and Wentz, which meant they kept 3 quarterbacks. So they really felt like he was something. That's why they kept him. And Jalen Hurts was playing bad. Let's be honest. Jalen Hurts was pretty okay in his rookie season, but he was playing bad. So it wasn't the worst decision to bench him. Clearly, Sudfeld wasn't it, so we don't get it that way. But I just think it got overblown because it was a national media, national stage, the only game on TV. I think that week 17, an opportunity to evaluate Sudfeld. If they did this in the 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock window, playing the Eagles there with one of the 10 games on Fox during that time, I don't think people would be so pressing on that it was tanked. They ruined everything. I think what they did is something that happens, and they clearly made the decision to do it. I feel bad for the Giants, but ultimately, like, that division, all you had to do was win 7 games. So I can't really excuse you. If Evan Ingram could catch a pass against the Eagles, then maybe you would go to the playoffs regardless.
That's a Pro Bowler right there.
That's true. That is a Pro Bowler tight end. So yeah, and that's where I'm at that.
So I have a couple things that I disagree with you on. I really think they were tanking in the fact that if they win that game, they go to the 9th draft spot. Now they're at the 6th. The capital to move from 9 to 6 is actually pretty significant, even though it's only 3 spots. Like, you're trading a lot of assets to get there. So that's number one. And second off, the first 2 drives, I think they saw what they had in Sudfeld. They could have they had like 4 drives in the 4th quarter, and at least one of them they could have brought back in Hurts. I really think they could have. If they wanted to win that game, they would have brought back in Hurts. And yeah, he wasn't doing the best in that game, but if you saw Sudfeld's mobility with that D-line coming at you, and you're telling me you'd rather have Sudfeld running out there than Hurts, I would just entirely disagree on that. And sure, you could say the first 2 drives they wanted to evaluate him, maybe even the first 3. But that last one, I mean, they didn't even try to throw a Hail Mary. The man was throwing balls into the dirt. I think Al Michaels said it best. He threw that. It was like a little running back just going to the sideline. He just threw it into the dirt, and he said, "What was that?" Yeah, I mean, it was hard to watch for everyone, and I'm with you. I don't have any sympathy for the Giants. If you want to go to the playoffs, win more than 6 games. Like, I get all that you want to, get in, but like being mad that you didn't get in because the the Eagles couldn't beat the 6-9 football team, like win more games. But I just disagree a little bit.
I get where you're coming from there. I just think they wanted to do an evaluation of Sudfeld. Clearly, Sudfeld isn't good.
Were the first two drives not enough?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they gave him an extra chance. I don't know if you would call it tanking because it's a problem with the league structure in and of itself. It's tough for me to ever think players and coaches tank just because tomorrow, Doug Peterson, even though he won a Super Bowl, there's no guarantee he has his job. What if Jeffrey Lurie thinks, well, I want Carson Wentz, and Carson Wentz says, I don't want Doug Peterson? Then Doug Peterson is fired, and now he has an extra loss in the loss column that might hurt him when you go to coaching interviews. Because let's say his record is now, let's say he was like going to be 500 and now he's below 500. That's not exactly him. I'm just making up some random example. But the point is, I just don't think that I think players and coaches have too much on the line because they get only 16 chances to prove themselves for every single year in order to make money. And for that reason, it's tough for me to just use the word tanking. I get what you're saying. Yeah, Sudfeld was bad. It was a kind of a weird situation. Horrific. But ultimately, it was kind of a weird situation because they did have that game on Sunday night. And I think if it wasn't on Sunday night, this conversation wouldn't be overblown because it's not that big of a deal, in my opinion.
And I don't think it's the players that are tanking, right? It's the coach's decision to put in Sudfeld when, if you're trying to win a game, it's pretty evident that Hurts is the better option. And I think Peterson's job is actually safe. I kind of disagree with you on that. Like, this is his first season. They didn't make the playoffs in the last, I believe, 3. And, next year he'll probably be on the hot seat, but I think he's fine going into next year. But, yeah, it was just tough to – I do agree with you that it was a little overblown because it was on Sunday night. Like, if this is a 1 o'clock game in MetLife – or, sorry, not MetLife, in the Eagles Stadium, it's not that big of a deal. But it was on prime time. There was big ramifications of the game.
Yeah. So, guys, I think we've reached the end. We've covered a lot of different things in this video. Thank you so much for sticking with us. I know people are super excited about the Deshaun Watson thing. We did cover it in this stream. I think there was some new information released about that he's not been responding to Caserio and stuff like that. I haven't really seen what that information is. We'll definitely do a different video on that. There's a lot before he gets to the 49ers. I'm sorry to say it. Again, like I said earlier in this video, if Deshaun Watson becomes available, there's going to be like 27 teams interested, and the Texans aren't going to go out of their way to trade him to San Francisco. So let's not get our hopes up too much. Ultimately, thank you so much for joining us. We'll probably stream again soon. We're going to have the man, the myth, Grant Cohn on hopefully soon whenever he's available. He's a busy guy, but we're going to be streaming again soon. Have a fun weekend watching these wildcard games. Stay safe given all the things that happened and the horrific events of yesterday, all of that. Please like, subscribe, and enjoy and share these videos. Thank you so much. We'll cut up and repost a lot of this stuff later.
Within the next few days.
Yep. Thank you.